Just a big thank you to the people who put together the Nantucket Book Festival. It's like the world's best play date for bookworms, isn't it? And we've all been getting together here for, is it 10 years now? You know, I see the same people over and over, people who love books, and it's just such a pleasure. And I will also say that interviewing Nancy on stage is a dream come true. And when I first moved to New York to work in book publishing, I read Stepping and Three Women at the Water's Edge, her first novels, and I flipped. I just thought, oh my gosh, I'm a fangirl forever. But we didn't know one another. No. And we were seated together at a book club dinner in New York, and I thought, oh, it's kismet, this has to be an omen. But we didn't start working together until some years later. We met on Nantucket through our mutual friend, the late Laura Simon, and it's just been such a joy to work with someone whose books I've loved since 1981. So here we go. So I'm gonna talk about the summer we started over, specifically, and then some of Nancy's writing in general. Okay. So let's jump in. Okay. So the summer we started over has gotten fantastic reviews, and one of the reviews said, it's awash in details about Nantucket, and it really showcases the simple pleasures of island life. Would you talk a little bit about those simple pleasures?
Oh, well, most of you, I assume maybe half of you are summer people, but a lot of you I know are year-rounders. And hi, Fran. And I've lived here for 42 years. And I'll tell you well, it's not a simple pleasure, but let me tell you how I got here. I was divorced, living in Williamstown, 2 small children. One of my very best friend, Dinah, came to Nantucket. This was about 44 years ago. And she called me up and said, you've got to come see Nantucket. It's beautiful, you've got to come see it. And I said, no, it's too far away. And she said, I know a man who has a show on the local TV channel, Artsview, and I'll get him to interview you, and then you can deduct the cost of your plane fare. So I came to Nantucket and met Charlie and got interviewed, and then we got married, but not as soon as I wanted to. He was a little slow, but I will not call him one of the simple pleasures, but I will say it's a great pleasure to do what he does, which is we just walk around the island. He's been walking for 5 miles at Sanford Farm. I walk all around the town, and I get to see the whale-shaped door knockers and the mermaid door knockers, and in this season, the boxes of flowers. And I walk down, we live near what we call the creeks, which is the end of the harbor. And I can walk down there in the winter, and there'll be the water going into sort of a swamp, and there'll be birds there, there'll be herons. And I'll see little kids going into the water, even though it's very cold. And it's quiet, and the sun is bright, and the water is reflecting, and there are little children just like spinning around. And that's one of the simple pleasures that I love so much about this place, because the nature and the history of Nantucket are unique, and they're fulfilling. And I'm so glad I get to live here to write about Nantucket. but also to write about families, because Stepping, which Meg mentioned, my first novel was about being a stepmother, and then Three Women at the Water's Edge was about two mothers and a woman who was falling in love, a sister who was falling in love. And those books did very well because they came out in 1980 and 1981 before Oprah Winfrey, before Phil, what was his name? Phil Donahue. And I got piles of letters from other women who were stepmothers. And so I thought, I want to write about families. My family, I love them. Parents, a younger sister, younger brother. We lived in Wichita, Kansas, the most boring place on earth. So I had to get away so I could find another interesting place to write about. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, and safe to say that interview with Charlie was the best interview of your life.
Yes, it was.
That worked out really well.
Yes, it did.
Okay, so let's talk about family and especially sisters. So in the new novel, the sisters are Eddie and Barrett, and I have a sub-question here about how they got their names. But the main question is about the two sisters who are so different. One basically runs away from a challenging family situation, moves to New York, and is leading kind of a glamorous life. And the other sister stays with her father, who is now a solo act, and puts down roots on Nantucket. So how do you get into the heads of two such different characters and women with such different hopes and dreams? And also, what about their names?
Here's how I started the novel. I always have ideas that are coming at me. And I was looking around our house one day, and I was thinking about people who hoard books. I don't know if any of you hoard books, but I thought, this guy is going to hoard books, and he's going to be a professor at Williams College, but some sad, terrible things have happened in his life, so he just wants to move away. And he moves to Nantucket, and he brings his two daughters with him. The oldest daughter, Eddie, after Edna St. Vincent Millay, because the father was an English professor who loved British literature. Eddie has always wanted to get away, and she's always wanted to work in publishing. So she's off on her way, and her younger sister, Barrett, after Elizabeth Barrett Browning, stays with her father, gets to know the town, works in the summer and in the winter, and makes a lot of money, because you can make a lot of money if you want to, like, be a waitress all day and then, I don't know, babysit at night. And Barrett wants to open a shop that I've always wanted to open, probably because I've been living on Nantucket. She opens a shop called Nantucket Blues, and everything in the shop is blue. Everything is, if you think of all, just looking at the different blues in the audience, and I think about indigo vases and pale blue sweaters and topaz earrings, and I had so much fun writing that shop and making it come to life. And Eddie and Barrett aren't really estranged. They are just on different paths. They keep in touch. But Barrett is really worried about her father, who basically shuts himself up in a room and writes all day, like some people I know. And so Barrett calls Eddie and says, "Come home." That's the way the novel begins. But this is the magic thing, and any of you who write know about this really weird magic, that people just appear. They just show up. I was talking on the phone while I was working on this book. I was talking on the phone to my friend Dinah, who now lives in Palm Beach. And she is very important to my life because she's the one who told me to come to Nantucket, introduced me to Charlie. When Doubleday gave me a party for my first book, Dinah went down with me. And Dinah is the kind of very tall, beautiful, hilarious, but elegant person who says things like, you can't just wear that black dress down there. Let me give you maybe my chain of diamonds. And so I had a chain of diamonds. Dinah is a diamond. But I'm talking to her, and I'm working on my outline and my getting to know my people. And I thought, Dinah Lavender is a romance novelist. And I said, Dinah, I have to go, bye. And here she was. And I think it's because I've always, I have never read Barbara Cartland. I don't know if you know who she is. She was a British romance writer who in the 1918, 1920, she was a Deb. She was wealthy. One of her best friends was the Queen Mother. And Barbara Cartland and her group, during the war, the First World War, had their own planes, and they flew their planes all around England to deliver the mail. And I've always thought, she's so cool. And then, when she got older, she wore these crazy hats, sort of like the era of Princess Diana, when everybody had wonderful hats and frou-frou skirts. And that's how Dinah Lavender came to me. And I don't know what, she has not left yet. She's still in the book.
Well, she's a memorable character. She must have been a lot of fun to write.
Yes, she was.
The other thing I love about this book, and Nancy's editor, Shauna Summers, is here. We were talking at breakfast this morning about this particular book and how the title really embodies something that I think resonates for so many of us, which is starting over. Hitting the reset button. And the circumstances that lead us to choosing to start over or having to start over. So can you talk a little bit about starting over, both in this novel and also in your own life?
Well, I think we all start over so many times in our lives, and sometimes happy and sometimes not happy. I feel like I start over with every new book, but personally, I started over when I left Wichita, Kansas, and I started over when I got divorced with 2 children, and I started over when I moved to Nantucket. And even though Laura Simon, who some of you may remember, was a writer who lived here on Nantucket, and she kept saying, "You've got to meet Meg Ruley. You really have to meet her." And I was starting a series of books that were completely not like any of the others.
Right.
The first one was called The Hot Flash Club. And some of you might understand why I wrote that book. And my current agent, I had only had for a little while, and she didn't really understand, and she was probably right in a way that it was not my sort of genre, my path of books. But I called Meg and said, Meg, I want a new agent.
The call I had been waiting for years.
And that laugh, when I said the Hot Flash Club, that laugh made me think, yes, we are going to be good together. So I started over with Meg, and that's been wonderful. And I have to say that I've been with, my first book came out in 1980. I've published 37 books. That's a lot of books. So I've started over every time I've started a book. But I think 20 years ago, I started over with Shauna, my editor. And it's been such a wonderful collaboration. And I have to tell you, Shauna's the one who said, call it The Summer We Started Over. She's the one. I think I had something sort of dreamy, like Nantucket breezes shifting the sand, or something that didn't mean anything at all. But I love romantic titles. But The Summer We Started Over was a wonderful title, and I thank Shauna for that.
Well, and I think also starting over is just, what we've all been doing since the pandemic. It still sort of feels like we're all getting our sea legs back and starting over again. And it's a great, I think in most senses, an optimistic title.
Yes.
So one other question about this book. So the family in it is wonderful. Two daughters who are quite devoted to their father and quite worried about him. A mother who sort of went AWOL, understandably, after the early death of a son. So they're a great family, but they're also fractured. And there is, I don't want to put any spoilers about the book out there, you need to read it, but there's a fair bit of sorrow in this book, too. There's joy and sorrow. So what did you want your readers to take away from the things that this family is going through?
First of all, with any of my novels, what I really want, the first thing, is for people to have pleasure reading it. Because that's how I feel. When I read a novel, when I sit back, go into that novel, it's not always a pleasure, but it's a kind of being safe and being someone else at the same time. What was the question? I forgot.
So how the...
Sorrow.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, see, I blank the sorrow out. Because I am optimistic. I think everybody in this room who's part of the family has probably dealt with at least one loss, if not many. It might simply be losing your grandparents. That was very big for me. It might be losing your parents. It might be losing a child. It might be losing a brother. Or it might be losing a best friend. And the friend doesn't have to die for you to lose her, for me to lose her. But I don't think we get through life without having a really heavy dose of sorrow in our lives. And maybe that provides sort of the contrast that painters know about, like the blue next to gold makes the blue prettier or more outstanding.
And the beauty of this book, even though I don't mean for us to dwell on sorrow, is that it's almost like a Shakespearean play. Every Nancy Thayer novel, in the end, it's not an implausible happy ending. It's a coming into balance, I feel, of the characters' lives. But when you were talking about people we miss, I will say one of the most beautiful things I've ever read by Nancy Thayer is a short piece in a collection called My Bookstore. And it's a collection of notable authors talking about the independent bookstores that have influenced their lives. And Nancy's piece was about Mimi Beeman and losing Mimi and how much Mimi inhabited the bookstore and made all of us who were shopping at Mitchell's feel as if we were her, her own personal pets. This is a book you'll like.
Yeah.
So, but that was a wonderful story.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you some writer questions now, nosy questions. Okay. So, how do you know when a book is finished? And what do you do? How do you know, and what do you do then? What's next?
Oh, I send it to Shauna. That's what I send it to my editor. And she goes through it and suggests some changes that really make the book better. And then it goes to the copy editor who catches a lot of things. I never feel like I'm done with the book until it's out in print, because also I don't make the cover. They have an art department. There's a wonderful person who designs and makes the covers of my book. So there's something about seeing the book with its cover. And I also, a lot of readers get advanced readers' copies. And that, I'm not done with the book then either, because that's when I spot most of the typos. And if I don't spot all of the typos, somebody, at least maybe 20 people, will email me to tell me on page 92, it should have been because instead of while or something. So also, with many of my books, I get emails from readers saying, please write a sequel. But by the time this book is out, I'm already working on another book, because I feel like our brains all have like little doors, and I always feel like there are people knocking on my door saying, I want you to talk about me. Look what I've done. It's crazy. I know. Yeah. And so when I go to sleep at night, I don't know why my brain works that. I'm sure yours does the same sort of thing. When I lie down, close my eyes, then that door opens, and somebody comes in and says, well, she's going to be short and he's going to be awfully tall, and I have to get up and talk into my phone and put this information in, because I won't remember it in the morning.
Charlie could probably write a great story about this. Nancy, what is your best advice? I know there are aspiring writers in this audience, and writers who publish too. What is your best advice, though, to a writer who is starting out and wanting to be published?
Two things. First, just keep at it. I don't know anybody who just wrote a book and then it got published. I'm sure there are writers out there, and they're all handled by Meg. So that's a hint. But most people really have to keep at it, be depressed, think they're worthless. They want to go, teach scuba diving. It's horrible. It's a horrible, horrible feeling. But the other thing is to find a writer's workshop or a group of people who are also writing, and you can do this now online. You don't have to walk around and ask people on the street. People who do not love you to read your manuscript. Because if your husband reads your book, he's going to say, this is brilliant. And if your best friend reads your book, he better. It really helps to have strangers read what you've written, and they might say, I don't understand why this happened at all. And that helps you know that you need to change it a little bit. But mostly, just keep trying. And there's so many ways now with the internet. There's Substack and there's Slate. And I don't even know, Brooke Foster, who's another writer I love, has her own newsletter. A lot of writers have newsletters.
I'm glad you meant, I'm going to have one more question. I just got the signal from Kaylee, and then I hope everybody will have questions for Nancy. 2 parts. What was your favorite book as a child? And has there ever been a book that you felt really changed your life?
Well, when I was a little child, it was probably something like The Pokey Little Puppy. I mean, I know. I read that when I was about 4. The book that changed my life was probably Little Women. Little Women changed so many of our lives, and there was a family, but then, and she became a writer, but I don't know if you know this, I adore Agatha Christie and Louisa May Alcott. Those were the 2 women who I knew wrote books back in the time when the New York Times Book Review, say in the 60s, 70s, 80s, for every book written by a woman that they'd review, they reviewed 12 men. That's the way it was. And I was told that I couldn't teach literature at a university because they didn't hire women. I was told this. And things have changed so much now for women in so many ways. But the thing that happened in my long life is that people started studying Louisa May Alcott, and there are wonderful books about her. And did you know that she took morphine every day of her life? She had arthritic fingers, and she had been a nurse in the Civil War. She'd contacted some kind of horrible disease. You should read about her life. And she also wrote thrillers. Louisa May Alcott wrote sensational, sexy thrillers. So I didn't know that back when I was like, Little Women Get Along. So that was the book that changed my life.
I always felt very connected to her because there was one named Meg, who was, of course, not the adventurous one. Anyway, let's take some questions from the floor, and I think there's, yes, a microphone. So, questions for Nancy.
Nancy, I imagine that Nantucket provides an endless supply of ideas for characters. Do you ever get questioned by people on the island? Are they so-and-so on page 93 or the villain on page 110?
I do. Not so much on Nantucket, but when I was living in Williamstown. And I've always been very careful, and there is that little quote at the beginning of a book that says, this is based on no real person, so don't sue us. And there was a woman in Williamstown who was a mother, like I was a mother, and 3 women at the water's edge came out, and it had a group of mothers who got together to talk about books and children. And one of the women had the kind of thin, lank hair that looked like it had never been washed. It always needed to be washed. And I had a friend named Jane, who came up to me when the book came out and said, I saw that you wrote about me in the book. And I thought, I really didn't know what she meant. And she explained it. I've had that sort of thing. More often people will think, well, I have to be careful about names. When I first married Charlie and moved here, I wanted to write a ghost novel, and I did. And the people in the novel were named Constable. And Charlie said, don't name them Constable. And I said, but I want to. And I didn't know the constables. There are a lot of them. I didn't know any of them. And that was I'd only been here a couple of years. So every now, I'm really careful with the names I choose.
I'm going to ask a question spinning off of Fran's, which is, I know Nancy's really been so brilliant on social media, and has a wonderful newsletter you can sign up for on her website. And I think part of what is so great about your presence on social media platforms is how natural you are. You're really not on there saying, buy my book, buy my book. It's really a snapshot of your daily life. It invites a lot of interaction. But I know you hear from a lot of your readers, and you actually are visited by a lot of your readers. Have you ever had anything really fun or wonderful or weird happen in that regard?
I've had fun things. In the early days, I had people just come knock on our door. And at first, I would say, come in, we'll have tea, let's talk. But then I got to the point, as all of you do if you live on Nantucket, where everyone I knew in Williamstown and everyone I knew really from anywhere in the United States and also from England would say, we're going to come to Nantucket in July, and we'd love to stay with you. And there were 2 or 3 summers where we had just visitors from moment to moment. Someone would go out the door and someone would come in. And there was a lovely woman who I'd known in Williamstown, and she was wonderful. And she came with her 3 kids one summer. And the next summer, she called in May and said, I'm coming down, she was British, I'm coming down with the children to spend 4th of July with you. And I said, no. And it shocked me. And that was such a powerful word, no.
You know, you could write a horror novel called, and then, wait, the title would be, We're Coming to Stay With You.
That's such a good idea. Isn't that a good idea?
Who has another question?
Hi, Nancy. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Meg. I just had a question. Other than Nantucket, what other place inspires you? Even just to visit, or inspires you to write, or someplace you enjoy?
I love England. I actually spent 1 year writing a novel about Dorothy Wordsworth because she was very influential, and I don't think she got enough credit. And so I went to the Lake District by myself, and this was a long time ago, and I didn't have a cell phone, but I went there, I stayed there, I walked in Grassmere, I went to Dove Cottage. I saw her diary under glass. I hope they've done something more with it since then, because I kind of thought I could just kind of break it and take the diary because nobody else was watching me. But I didn't. But I did try to write Dorothy Wordsworth's life, but I'm not a historical fiction writer, and I don't know all that stuff. So then I went to Wales with Charlie, and that's the place I really love. I went there with Deborah. We tried to climb Mount Snowdon, which is only 3,000 feet high, but we never made it because it's such a hard place to climb. And the Welsh believe that King Arthur lived there, and that his grave is there. So then I thought, oh, and I also met Jan Morris. This is Jan Morris. I don't know if any of you know who she is. She was, what, Jim Morris? Yeah. And he climbed with Sir Edmund Hillary to the top of Mount Everest. Then, after they'd had 5 children, Jim had a complete sex change and became Jan. And she and her wife, this was 40 years ago or 30 years ago, they came to visit us on Nantucket. They didn't stay with us. But then when I went to Wales with my daughter, Jan invited us to her house, and we met her wife, Elizabeth, and we saw Jan's bed, which had a little stuffed animal on it. And I thought, Wales is so weird. Wales is like magic. And there's a book called The Mabinogion, which is a book of Welsh tales that probably Dick has heard of it, and nobody else in the past century has heard of it. Anyway, I spent a year writing a book called Magic Land, but it's not like any of my other books. So maybe in 10 years I'll...
Nice.
Yeah. What do you think, Meg?
I like it. Who's got another question? Oh, one in the front.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Fran.
Thanks for being here today. When you came to Nantucket, married Charlie, how long did it take you to feel like you were really part of the community? I mean, I don't know how it is for people coming from elsewhere, but at that time, was it easier than it is now, or how long did it take?
It took a while. I made a couple of really good friends because my son played piano, and I met Deborah, who taught Josh piano, and she was probably my first really good friend. It was hard. 40 years ago, Nantucket was quite different. And when I came, if any of you know Williamstown, which I think of Williamstown as being the place where women wear plaid kilts all the time, which if you try them on, they aren't kind to the female figure. But when I came here, everybody was much more casual, and I always felt like I was wearing the wrong thing, and it took a while. But then the magic thing that happened is that I got involved with our Athenaeum, with our library, and Charlotte Mason arrived, who was director of the library. And oh my gosh, we had so much fun. We'd go to board meetings that were very serious, and then with another friend, Sue Beagle, who some of you might know, Charlotte and Sue and I would leave the meeting, not in the middle of it, after it was ended, and we'd go to the Brotherhood and have margaritas. And that, for me, was sort of the turning point. Oh, and Mimi Beeman, of course. Mimi was always, always my very best friend. I'll say one final thing about Mimi. There was a show called Lost about 20 years ago that was set on an island where a plane crashed, and there were all these people who had survived, and one of them was Josh Holloway, who was a very handsome blonde. And Mimi and I had our own little fan club, and we would call each other on the phone while we were watching. Did you? And one time, Sawyer was in the ocean, and then he was swimming. He got out, and I called Mimi, and I said, "How do you like Sawyer with his shirt off?" And Mimi said, "I like Sawyer wet." That's when I felt at home.
One more question. I think there's a woman in the front row who's been raising her hand. Oh, not that one, but good. 2 more questions. Go ahead. Sorry.
I wanted to ask you how much of your own life you put into the books, because when you just mentioned Wales and Mount Snowdon, I read that book and then I read a bunch of your other ones, and I remember there was a character that fell off the mountain cliff in Mount Snowdon, and you know, so I'm just wondering how autobiographical are some of your, or do you just take pieces from your life and put them into the books? And
all of my books are very autobiographical because I'm writing about families. And if you think about it, we all have really a lot of relatives or friends who are like relatives. I have a blue-eyed blonde, 9 years younger baby sister who's spoiled, and she shows up often in my novels. I have used, the one person I've never used is Charlie. Never used him in a novel. But everything is autobiographical. And that's because I love families. And just think of how families have changed in the past 40 years. In vitro and everything else.
One more question.
Okay. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Jess.
You mentioned earlier that by the time a book has come out, you're already kind of deep in the weeds of opening those new doors to new characters. Can you tell us a little bit about what comes next for you?
I don't know. I mean, Shauna, I haven't talked it over with my editor, or I haven't talked it over with Meg. Oh, I have, because we've decided on a title of my next novel, which is Nantucket Summer Light. Because the light on Nantucket, I think, is so different from anywhere else. I think it's made of I don't know, seabird feathers and history and fog. So, but that's not, it's not a weather report, but that's the title of the book. Yes, and Shauna and I have been working on the,
Watch for it in summer, spring, right?
Spring
2025.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy. I have to say, I celebrate your 37 novels. You're the real McCoy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.